I know a lot of national reporters are going to parachute into this race and do the Democratic primary story through the prism of Gaza. That's going to be how this is done, pure and simple. I think the conversation we've had, it's obvious that if you pay attention to this campaign, it's. Well, let me ask you this: what percentage of this campaign in your mind is about Gaza in the primary? How much do voters care, and how much of it do you think it should be a voting issue in this primary?
I'm going to push back on the premise of the question for a second.
Okay.
And because we're in a long form here, let me just nerd out for a second.
Yeah.
In epidemiology, oftentimes what you do is you fit a graph to a set of data, and then you ask about the impact of any one variable on a particular outcome, as if those variables don't architect on top of each other. And so we end up being implicitly reductive with any lens that we apply to analyze a situation. So the question that is asked is often, how much of a vote share does Gaza control because of what people think about Gaza? And I think in Michigan, quite a lot, to answer that question. But I actually think that the operational role of the question of calling a genocide when you see it is as a values Rorschach test. It is foundational to whether or not I can believe that you're serious when you tell me that you're going to stand up to a corporate CEO or you're going to stand up to Donald Trump. Because if you can't call what is happening when they kill 18,500 kids, 60,000 people total, render their entire homes unlivable, kill journalists, destroy hospitals, and then try and push them into a different country because they happen to speak the same language. If you can't call that a genocide, then I question your moral judgment generally or your understanding of the English language. So I just think that at some point, it tells you whether or not people are actually serious about the values that they purport to have. So how can I trust you when you can't even push against the enforced language of your own party, being enforced by MAGA billionaires, by the way, to actually show up and fight against Donald Trump, or to show up and fight against the pharmaceutical lobby, or to show up and fight against the corporate insurance CEOs? It undercuts all of those things. So as a direct issue, yeah, it is profound. This is a genocide that's paid for by our tax dollars that are not being used to spend on our kids. But as an indirect issue, it has become such a moral lens to see the world, because if you can't see the obvious thing in front of you, how can I trust you to see the other things as well? How can I trust you when you tell me you're going to fight for me?
Do you believe Israel was justified to go after Hamas after October 7th?
I think the question is, let me step back. When we talk about justified, right? I don't know what that means in the context of all of this, because, I condemned Hamas on day one. And I condemned Hamas because they killed innocent people. They kidnapped children. Anybody who kidnaps innocent people or kills children is wrong. That's wrong, right? But then the question of how many then people, right? 1,200 people were killed, innocent people, and that is wrong. It is condemnable, and that's why I condemned it. But then the question then becomes, okay, so what then becomes justified in the context of that awful atrocity? I think it's really, really difficult to answer what a line would have been, because I think a lot of us who've been watching that situation for a very long time would say, we all knew where this was going. And we all knew that there were people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu who were going to see in that an opportunity to answer to a base that sees this as a messianic issue, not just one around protecting innocent people.
Look, I would argue the extremes want each other, right? Hamas would love a further to the right Israeli government, and vice versa. It's sick to say it that way, but in some ways the extremes strengthen each other, which is part of the problem.
And I think that you are exactly correct. And then I think about how do we get to a place where we can imagine an ultimate peace? That's the worry that I have, is that every president before this guy who's ever been president in the United States since the existence of the state of Israel has said that they believe in a two-state solution. And then the problem with it is that we aid, arm, and abet the very people who then want to foreclose on the possibility of a Palestinian state. And yet we're sitting here saying we believe in a two-state solution, and then our money goes in a different place. And so to me, I find some of these questions kind of incoherent because they are decontextualized from the circumstance on the ground, right? What Hamas did is awful. It's terrible. It's wrong. It's condemnable. And what the Israeli government has been doing is wrong, awful, contemptible and should be condemned. And the problem is that, I'm running for senator from Michigan, right? I'm not running for senator from anywhere else. My responsibility is to where we spend our tax dollars. And my point is, it's not my job. There's too much hubris, frankly, among American policymakers to get to think that they get to dictate what the ultimate peace looks like. It's not my job. My job is to make sure that American taxpayers get what's best for the taxes that they pay. And I think sending blank checks to foreign militaries, and by the way, not just Israel, but Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, right? All of whom, right, have sustained military dictatorships over their own people. I just don't think that's a good value for pay for Michigan taxpayers, which is where I sit. And I don't want my tax dollars going to fund a genocide. I want my tax dollars funding my kids' school. I want them funding my healthcare. I want them funding my roads and bridges. And that shouldn't be so difficult to communicate, while also saying, hey, look, this thing of killing this many people is an obvious genocide. They said they were going to do it, and then they did it. So what else do we want to talk about here?
Speak to the issue, and I think this is where a lot of this has been very difficult for Jewish Americans, frankly, no different than it was for Muslim Americans after 9/11, which is you get thrown into one bucket. And every Jewish American feels like they're being, and I always say, you know what, there's plenty of Jewish Americans who condemn Bibi, but are pro-Israel. And you can have this nuanced position, except it doesn't look like you can. Right? It feels like in our politics today, it's very difficult to have that position.
I hope that folks can find space, right? What is it we all want? We all want everybody to have peace and dignity and the right to self-determination. And I think here, what we want is not to be assumed to believe anything based on the color of our skin or our faith or our ethnic background. And so I've been very, very clear to say that the government of Israel does not speak for the Jewish people or for Judaism. And I think we have to always differentiate between the Jewish people and Judaism and the government of Israel. And any effort to try and muddle those two things up, I think verges on the risk of anti-Semitism. And so I think we have to be very, very, very honest about sustaining the space where people can have a multiplicity of opinions, and also that we can engage in peaceful, in honest, in direct, in vulnerable conversation with each other about what we think the best course of American action ought to be get the outcomes that we want, which is peace, dignity, and the right to self-determination for Palestinians and Jewish Israelis alike. And I just think that, like, if you start with those principles, it becomes a lot easier from there to step forward and say, okay, then what ought to be done, right? How do we actually do this thing, moving from this really difficult situation? And Chuck, I'll just go back to the point that you made, which is you've got extremes that have dominated the conversation because they can always hijack that conversation and force people to respond to the most extreme thing they just did. And I hate to say it, but like, you've got those extremes winning the day. And I don't know where we go from here, but I do hope that more of us, regardless of our ethnic or our faith backgrounds, can have the courage to both differentiate between groups of people and principle, and the courage to have an honest, vulnerable, and direct conversation about what the best course of action for the American public is. Now, look, there's a lot of money spent in our politics, mainly by MAGA billionaires with very particular opinions, to try and keep us from having a direct and honest conversation. Like I told you, I've been all over my state. And wherever I go, like I'll be in Escanaba in the UP, when I talk about the obvious trade-off around our tax dollars, it's one of the biggest applause lines I get. I've had people come up to me like, how come I've never heard a politician say the things that you say? And I'll say, well, because you know that point I always make, I'm running on three things: getting money out of politics, putting more money in your pocket, and passing Medicare for all. That first one, right, makes it really, really difficult to have a direct conversation about where our tax dollars go, because people are too worried that MAGA billionaire money is going to flow into a Democratic primary and dictate who gets to win and who gets to lose.
Let me ask one question on a word you use. Some people hear the word genocide and they think, oh, I'm not going to be able to have a nuanced conversation with that person. Why are they wrong?
I had a really meaningful experience. I was invited to speak with the Jewish caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party. And there were a lot of questions about whether or not I would show. And of course I was going to show up because I love and revere the Jewish people. I care a lot about my ability to make sure I understand their perspective and that I can serve them. Because let's be clear, like the fight against Islamophobia is the same as the fight against anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
Those
They're
two
very
things tend to
close. Well, I
run
always say
side by
we're all
side.
Semitic,
Right. And
by the way.
I had a really well-meaning gentleman, he kind of came up to me afterwards. He said, first, I want to tell you, you've got some chutzpah for having showed up. I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. He's like, you're a real mensch. I was like, you're really hitting the points here.
Got to get all the Yiddish out. There we go.
I was like, and he was like, but I disagree with you. I was like, that's not surprising to me, but can you share where you disagree? He said, you use the word genocide. I said, I do. He said, why? I was like, well, because the word has a technical meaning, and I was trained as a scientist to use the word for the thing that I am seeing. And he said, but how can you call this a genocide in the face of something like the Holocaust? And I said, I can understand why the lived experience or the shared familial intergenerational experience of the Holocaust and the insane, profound, almost incalculable degree of pain that was inflicted upon the Jewish people by a madman, dictator, genocidal maniac in Hitler. I can understand why the pain of that might echo in ways where my use of that word could be painful. I understand that. And I appreciate you sharing it. And at the same time, if the only historical moment to which we can use the word genocide is the Holocaust, then we're setting an extraordinary high bar, which basically renders the word genocide unusable in any other situation. And so I don't know how to both talk about this and say that this is not the Holocaust. Let's be clear, right? 6 million people were not killed or exterminated in gas chambers. And yet the word was meant to protect innocent people from being rendered subjects of war so profound that it targeted them based on ethnicity in a particular place and intended specifically to bring about their particular demise. I think in the memory of the Holocaust is our responsibility to make sure that nothing like that, even to a far, far lesser degree, happens again. And so I just think that we have to be willing to use it when we believe that it meets those technical criteria.
Right.
And that is, to me, the best way to dignify, right, that awful, terrible memory in a way that renders it meaningful and protects other people from ever having to befall something like that again. But I also understand that, like, this is a painful, challenging scenario. So I hope that folks who are listening and folks who hear me use that word understand that I do not in any way undermine or demean the incredible crime against humanity that the genocide of the Holocaust was. But we don't have the past to control. We have the future to control. And the question of the way we use words to move the future, I think that's the way we ought to be all thinking about it right
should
now.
we be saying more directly that China's committing genocide on the Uighurs?
Yes.
Yeah.
We should. And the reason that we don't is because China is massively powerful.
Correct.
And they swing their weight around to make sure that we don't use that word, which is exactly why we should. I mean, like, this is the word that is used by definition among people with some modicum of power to protect the powerless. If you're a powerful people, you don't have genocide inflicted on you. By definition, you are powerless when you have genocide inflicted on you. So it is our responsibility as people with some modicum of power to have the courage to use it. Now, the reason that a lot of people don't is because you often are talking about far more powerful actors. And using
look, I
it
do think a real reason
may mean
is
cost.
Well, there's another reason sometimes not to use it is that it suddenly the person turns off the head, right? They turn you off. I'm not listening to you if you're going to use that, right? Some words. That's why I ask. I mean, and I think you gave a look. If every voter gets an opportunity to hear your explanation, then I think you're going to have a leg up. But there are some people. There's the use of a word, right? You know, sometimes what do they call them? What is it? Godwin's law on the internet about Hitler, right? And you know, when an argument, certain words. That's why I asked, because that word can just somebody may just literally turn it off. Up, I'm not listening to him anymore. What do you say to that?
And I understand that that is an instinct that's there.
Mhm.
I think my job is to, if I do my job well, it is to create the space in our public conversation and our civic debate
Mhm.
that enables us to do the things we need to do to create the kind of future we all want to live in. That's the work. Like that's what at its best, that's what politicians are supposed to do. And I think if we shy away from using the words as they're defined,
Mhm.
I don't know that we are doing the thing we need to do and to get that future in the right way. And I understand that there's a trade-off there.
Mhm.
And I think that there is this ability that we all have to also master, which is to be able to use words responsibly, but use words correctly, and always, always use them lovingly.
Yeah.
Which is to say, it's out of my love for Palestinian people and my love for Jewish Israeli people that when I see people hurting other people, that I stop that thing
Yeah.
from happening.
Look, I don't believe Israel's safe until Palestinians are safe.
There's a tradition, a word in our tradition. There's it's a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he said, "Give victory to your brother," meaning your like companion,
Mhm.
the person you're with, whether they're right or they're wrong. And they said, "Wait, what do you mean by like they're right or they're wrong?" He said, "If they're wrong, protect them, and I'm sorry, if they're right, protect them, right? But if they're wrong, then correct them. That's how you give somebody who's wrong victory." And I just think that we would do well. It's not out of a, obviously I'm Arab. I know that. And so when it comes from my mouth
Mhm.
with my name, people assume that it's a tribal thing.
Right.
It really is not. And this is why, like, I have taken it on the chin when I condemned Hamas on day one. Folks are like, well, you're not contextualizing it within the broader occupation, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, look,
Right.
at the end of the day, if you hurt kids, there's no context needed.
Right.
And folks will be like, well, like, oh, you must be a self-hating Arab, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, no. I am just a human-loving Arab, okay? I'm a human-loving person. And when I think innocent people are hurt, I'm going to show up and I'm going to say the thing I think needs to be said. And so I hope folks can understand that sometimes your experience set may give you an insight that's a little bit different. But ask people where their principles are and then ask them to apply their principles in all situations. And when folks ask me, they're like, well, what about Egypt then? That's the first question I always get. Do you think we should stop sending money to Egypt? I'm like, absolutely, we should. Right? Absolutely, we should. And folks are like, wait, so explain that. I'm like, they're like, Egyptian people like you. I'm like, yes, you think I'm coming at this as a tribalist. I'm not. Like, I spent childhood summers in Egypt. I watched as that tax money made Egyptians less free and less safe from their own government.
Yeah, it's a corrupt government.
I don't think us sending our money abroad is helping us or helping them. And I think it's the same story when it comes to Israel. And I just think that we should apply our principles everywhere.